Hello, welcome back to Indus News with me, Osman Lone. Well, we begin this hour with news just in of a meeting of Pakistan's National Security Committee that's decided to cut trade ties with India after it illegally ended the special status of occupied Kashmir. Chaired by Prime Minister Imran Khan, the meeting decided to downgrade diplomatic relations with India. It was resolved that Pakistan would raise the issue at the United Nations Security Council. It was also decided that Pakistan will observe its Independence Day on August 14th in solidarity with Kashmiris, while the 15th of August, which is India's Independence Day, will be observed as a Black Day. Earlier, the Prime Minister discussed the illegal accession of occupied Kashmir with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson over the phone. Staying in Pakistan, and a joint session of Parliament has approved a resolution against India's illegal move to end Indian-occupied Kashmir's special status. The resolution condemned a ceasefire violation and the use of banned ammunition by Indian forces against the civilian population along the line of control. It also condemned imposition of curfew and increased deployment of Indian forces in the region. The resolution emphasized that the enforcement and legitimacy of resolutions of the UNSC can never be diluted by unilateral actions. It said that India is using regressive measures to change the demography of the region. Addressing the Parliament, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said India has internationalized Kashmir issue through its unlawful move. He went on to say that Pakistan's political leadership is united for Kashmir's cause. Well, the United Kingdom have also stepped in to express their concern over India's illegal actions in Kashmir. British Foreign Minister Dominic Raab calls for calm and said he spoke to his Indian counterpart about the situation in occupied Kashmir. The recent decision to split Kashmir in two has sparked international outcry over India's illegal actions.
Spoken to the Indian Foreign Minister, in fact twice since my appointment, and I spoke to him earlier today. We've expressed some of our concerns around the situation and called for calm, but also had a clear readout of the situation from the perspective of the Indian government.
Situation in Kashmir has turned deadly as an unarmed Kashmiri youth has been martyred by Indian occupying forces in Srinagar amid a total lockdown of the valley. Occupation forces have also arrested over 100 others in the past 12 hours. Occupied Kashmir is under a crushing curfew since the last 72 hours after India unilaterally announced its accession. In defiance of the Indian oppression, Kashmiris took to the streets to protest New Delhi's revocation of their right to self-determination. Occupying forces baton charged the unarmed peaceful protesters and fired tear gas upon them. Now, the curfew imposed by India is making life difficult for the local people there, and residents of the valley say they're facing food, water and shortages of medicines, and only Indian soldiers can be seen on the streets. More in this report.
2 days after the Indian government scrapped the special status of Jammu and Kashmir, Srinagar seems like a ghost town. Going out to buy groceries is now near impossible due to the Indian Army's lockdown of the area.
We face problems in every facet of life, including in our homes. I stepped out just now and walked for 2 kilometers. 10 people have already asked me where I was going.
Locals say the curfew is making it hard for people to make a living.
There's already no work here. Literate young people are sitting idle. There are shortages of food and water, so a curfew should not be imposed.
Heavy security is deployed in several parts of the region, with police patrolling and conducting searches at various checkpoints. But the locals are used to the curfews and intimidation, as these tactics have been used by India for the past 70 years.
Now, in other news, as the war in Syria continues, 28 fighters have been killed during a government advance into rebel-held areas of northern Hama province. The Syrian Observatory says the dead included 10 government soldiers and 18 rebels. Another 5 people were killed by an ISIS car bombing in a Kurdish-held town in northeast Syria. Earlier in the day, 4 fighters of the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces were killed in 2 attacks in eastern Deir ez-Zor province. A truce proposed in the recent Astana peace talks was supposed to protect 3 million people living in the northern region. but it was observed for only 2 days after Damascus accused its opponents of attacking civilian areas. Turkey has said the United States is getting closer to its position on establishing a safe zone in Kurdish-controlled northeast Syria. Speaking in Ankara, Defense Minister Hulusi Akar said Turkey has made preparations to launch an operation, but wants to act together with the US. Now, this comes after Washington warned Ankara it would prevent any unilateral incursion into Syrian territory. Earlier, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Turkey is determined to destroy all arms of the PKK militant group. He promised to intervene to create a safe zone inside Syria. Now, in Afghanistan, 18 people have been killed and 145 others wounded in a car bomb explosion outside a police station in Kabul. The Taliban have claimed responsibility for the attack. The Afghan Interior Ministry says the injured have been moved to a hospital. This comes as the US and Taliban try to negotiate a peace deal ahead of the September 28th Afghan elections. Israel has approved the construction of more than 2,300 illegal settlement homes in the occupied West Bank. A local NGO called Peace Now says the building plans are the latest in a surge of such approvals since US President Donald Trump took office. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledged to annex much of the West Bank during his election campaign earlier this year. His government began demolishing dozens of Palestinian homes in East Jerusalem last month. Two Turkish ships are continuing to drill for gas off the coast of Cyprus and will soon be joined by another vessel. Speaking on board one of the ships, Turkish Energy Minister Fatih Donme said the new exploration vessel would be in position by the end of the month. Now, this follows the imposition of sanctions on Turkey by the European Union last month. Cyprus and Turkey have long disputed ownership of offshore oil and gas reserves in the eastern Mediterranean. Ankara says Turkish Cypriots are entitled to a share of the resources. Now, in other news today, the United States and Saudi Arabia said they will work together to counter Iran's aggressive efforts to disrupt oil supplies in the Persian Gulf. Meeting in Washington, Saudi Energy Minister Khalid Al-Faleh and US Energy Secretary Rick Perry promised to ensure the smooth supply of oil to global markets. In a statement, they said they will tackle Iran's attempts to disrupt supplies. Now, this comes after Iran seized a second vessel in the Gulf earlier this week, claiming it was carrying smuggled fuel. US President Donald Trump says talks are underway with South Korea on paying a greater share of the cost of maintaining American forces in the peninsula. He went on to say that Seoul has paid very little over the past few decades. Trump said South Korea paid $990 million to Washington last year at his request. The US military has maintained a large force in South Korea since the Korean War in the 1950s. North Korea has called its latest missile launches an adequate warning over the US and South Korea's joint military drills. Pyongyang conducted its fourth short-range missile test in less than 2 weeks, warning it might pursue a new road. Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un inspected the launch of a new type of tactical guided missile to verify its war capacity. The exercises are taking place despite Pyongyang's warning they would jeopardize nuclear negotiations between the United States and North Korea. Meanwhile, US National Security Advisor John Bolton reminded Kim of his pledge to President Donald Trump. Kim had promised not to resume launching intercontinental range missiles that threatened the US. Now, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he has urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to resume peace talks over the separatist region of Donbass. The leaders spoke after 4 Ukrainian soldiers were killed in shelling by Russian-backed separatist forces earlier this week. Zelensky says such incidents should be stopped in order to bring both countries closer together. Putin said Ukrainian forces should stop shelling civilian settlements in Donbass. The leaders of Ukraine, Russia, France and Germany last met in 2016 for the Normandy peace talks. Now, as the situation in Venezuela continues, its government says it will continue talks with the opposition despite new U.S. economic sanctions. Opposition leader Juan Guaido also says he's ready to continue dialogue with President Nicolas Maduro's administration. Foreign Minister Jorge Arisia said Venezuela would not surrender to U.S. pressure and will bypass the latest round of sanctions. But U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton said Washington will impose sanctions on any company doing business with Caracas. On Monday, Washington seized all Venezuelan government's U.S.-based assets. Now, members of the United Nations have signed an agreement to make it easier to settle cross-border commercial disputes. The Singapore Convention on Mediation has been signed by 46 countries, including the US and China. Now, this comes amid rising trade tensions between the world's top two economies, Washington and Beijing. Elsewhere, Japan and South Korea have locked horns over trade tariffs, and Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said the convention will help advance international trade, commerce and investment. Loong said the signatories have come together to declare they are open for business. UN Legal Affairs Assistant Secretary General Stephen Matthias said he hopes the convention will improve the credibility of mediation. Now, the United Kingdom's Labour Party says it will back a second referendum in Scotland to decide whether it will remain in post-Brexit Britain. Speaking in Edinburgh, Labour's deputy leader John McDonnell said the party will not block the vote. He went on to say that the Labour Party believes the people of Scotland have a democratic right to decide their future. This comes after a recent opinion poll showed 52% of Scottish voters now back separation from the UK. Russia's general prosecutor has said some of the wildfires in Siberia were started by illegal loggers. He specifically mentioned fires in the Irkutsk region, saying fires had been started there to conceal the felling of trees. The Russian Emergencies Minister says the blaze in Siberia had been reduced by a quarter. Greenpeace has warned the fires are releasing as much greenhouse gases into the atmosphere as emitted by 36 million cars in a year. Now, Colombia has announced it will grant citizenship to 24,000 children born to Venezuelan parents in its territory since August 2015. The move aims to safeguard the fundamental rights of stateless infants. Until now, Colombian law only allowed children of foreigners who legally reside in the country to apply for citizenship. The children will also have access to health and education. According to immigration authorities, more than 1.4 million Venezuelans are living in Colombia after fleeing the economic crisis in the oil-rich nation. Many of these migrants entered Colombia without a passport. Now, more than $2 million worth of gold coins were stolen when armed robbers broke into a Mexican government coin manufacturer. Security officials say the coins were stolen from a vault that had been left open. Police say 2 people broke into the Casa de Moneda branch in the morning after throwing a security guard to the ground. Security officials say the robbers filled a backpack with 1,567 gold coins. Criminal activities in Mexico have increased during record lawlessness plaguing the country. Now, negotiators from over 195 countries have finalized a landmark report on climate change for the United Nations after marathon talks in Geneva. The flagship study from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change will be released on Thursday. The land use report, compiled by over 100 scientists, is over 1,000 pages thick. The UN report is based on land degradation and food security. Now, one of the largest threats to the environment is the use of single-use plastics. 300 million tons of it is produced every year, while up to only 13% is recycled. Now, one Mexican researcher has proposed a surprising solution to the problem: the prickly pear cactus. More in this report.
Humanity's addiction of disposable plastic can be seen anywhere on Earth. The stuff can be found everywhere, even the Mariana Trench. Without a biodegradable alternative, the situation will get worse. However, Mexican researcher Sandra Pasco may have found just what the world needs.
The idea came from students to start with this production of biodegradable plastic from prickly pear cactus. From there, the idea developed, and we, that group of students and I, started working on it.
Pasco's new packaging material is made from cactus pulp, which is biodegradable and non-toxic.
We are in the application tests. If the tests are favorable, there could be a transfer of technology in the future to begin with its mass production.
Pasco's creation will get the chance to prove itself next year when Mexico's Jalisco state bans disposable plastics. But the researcher says the cactus packaging will not be enough to stop plastic pollution.
Both the companies, with the selling of their products, and the consumers, we make this exaggerated use of resources. Because we go to the store and you buy anything and they ask you, would you like a bag? In fact, the product you buy already has the primary packaging, sometimes even up to a tertiary one.
UN member states made a commitment to reduce production of single-use plastics last year, but environmentalists warn their goals will fall short of tackling the planet's pollution crisis, as over 8 million tons of plastic enter the world's oceans every year.
Now in Canada, icebergs are a source of wonder to tourists and a joy to merchants. More and more ice giants from Greenland are drifting to the island of Newfoundland in eastern Canada. Some see it as a boon, others as a stark illustration of the accelerating melting of the Arctic. More in this report.
Every summer in Newfoundland, Edward Keane goes hunting for icebergs. Keane and his crew collect ice blocks that have floated down thousands of miles from Greenland's glaciers, a sight that's becoming more common as temperatures rise.
They're going to die in a couple, 3 weeks and naturally be gone back to nature anyway. So we're not here hurting the environment.
The water from the glaciers of the Arctic is renowned for its purity because it was frozen long before the air pollution of the Industrial Revolution. Over 2 months, Keane and his crew can recover about 800,000 litres of iceberg water, which they sell to traders at $1 a litre. Kerry Chalk then bottles the ice water and sells it at the markup price of $20 US. Between May and July each year, hundreds of icebergs break away from Greenland's glaciers and ice sheet and drift to the Canadian coast. For the past 4 years, former fisherman Barry Strickland has organised tourist excursions around icebergs, which often sell out.
Just keep getting better every year. You know, we got tour buses coming here now. You can't see behind you there, but we just had a tour bus coming out. We got 135, 140 tour buses, you know, with older people coming into the town every season.
Greenland's ice experienced a record thaw in June 2019, and the Arctic is warming 3 times faster than the rest of the world. But for these coastal communities, the icebergs that venture down from Greenland could be floating white nights.
Now in the Philippines, they've declared dengue as a national epidemic after the death toll from the outbreak topped over 600. The outbreak follows the banning of an ineffective French dengue vaccine, which caused dozens of children's deaths over the past 2 years. The health department says 150,000 cases of dengue fever were recorded between January and July. It went on to say that children below the age of 10 have been worst hit. Officials say most of the country has been affected by the dengue epidemic. The death toll from the tropical storm Typhoon Wipa that hit northern Vietnam on Monday has risen to 12. Vietnam's Natural Disaster Prevention Agency says the powerful storm has left 9 others missing. The agency says the missing are mostly from the Thanh Hoa province. Wipa caused heavy rain, whirlwinds, landslides and floods in the northern region. Natural disasters in the Southeast Asian country have killed 34 people and damaged over 300 houses so far this year. The General Statistics Office says the storms caused economic losses of about $10.5 million. The United Nations Development Programme says Vietnam faces 6 or 7 typhoons every year. Now, orphanages in South Africa are having a difficult time finding new homes for abandoned children and babies. Most of these children are born of rape, making their very existence a taboo in society. Indus News has this report.
South Africa has one of the highest rates of sexual violence in the world. Many victims are minors and immigrants. They often become aware of their pregnancy after 20 weeks, but by that time, it's too late to legally have an abortion. The mothers are left with little or no option but to leave their babies at orphanages.
It's important to remember that they've been abandoned themselves. They've been abandoned by the partner of the father of their child. They've been abandoned often by their family. And they've been abandoned by their communities and society as a whole.
One such orphanage is run by a charity called Door of Hope. The orphanage has installed an abandoned baby box for desperate parents.
Last night, around 8:30, the center went off, and then they looked at the camera screen only to find that there's a baby, and then they just went in front of the house and go get the baby. The baby arrived through the baby box.
The National Adoption Coalition says as many as 3,000 children are abandoned each year, while activists say the number could be as high as 10,000. Now, with the government's proposal to ban adoption fees, it's feared that most of these babies might never find a home.
Hello and welcome back. Now we take a look at the stories of business from around the world. And President Donald Trump has continued to press the US Federal Reserve to accelerate interest rate cuts. He said the US Central Bank needs to keep up this pace with global counterparts. President Trump has been calling on the Federal Reserve for months to lower interest rates to support the US economy. He said China is losing companies while money is being poured into the United States. The president went on to say that this implies that the Federal Reserve is the main economic hurdle for America and not China. Trump has criticized the Federal Reserve even though it approved a quarter-point rate cut just last week. Now, stock markets in the US have dropped sharply as investors were startled by signals from the bond market about risks of a recession. Amid concerns about the impact of an escalating US-China trade war, central banks in Thailand and New Zealand cut their interest rates overnight. The Dow Jones International Average dropped 328 points. Following the declining trend, the S&P 500 slumped 0.9%. The Nasdaq Composite also traded 0.6%. Bank stocks including JP Morgan, Chase and Bank of America led the decline, losing the most from falling interest rates. Well, after days of losses, the European stock markets have gained ground as fears of a protracted trade war between the US and China tend to recede. Investor sentiment was buoyed by the $3.9 billion sale of chemical park operator CORREIA by Germany's Bayer and Laxness groups. The DAX in Frankfurt and Paris CAC index are both trading more than 1% higher. London's FTSE 100 index is up 0.75%, despite losses reported by major commodities firm Glencore. Asian bourses closed mixed after the White House said it would pursue scheduled trade talks with China in September. Well, the Pakistan Cricket Board has sacked its head coach Mickey Arthur along with all of its support staff. This decision is believed to be a response to the national team's 5th place finish at the recent ICC Cricket World Cup. The board announced it had ended its association with the coaching staff and decided not to renew their contracts. Bowling coach Azam Mahmood will also be replaced. The PCB Cricket Committee was unanimous in their recommendations for the change. Board Chairman Ahsan Mani has endorsed committee's verdict and thanked departing staff for their services. English Premier League club Manchester City have signed 18-year-old winger Felix Corrêa from Portuguese club Sporting Lisbon. Corrêa is yet to make a senior international appearance for Portugal, but he's part of the country's under-19 squad. He went on to help Portugal reach the final in the under-19 European Championship last month. Corrêa will be City's fourth incoming transfer of the season. Manchester City will begin their Premier League title defence with a trip to West Ham United on Saturday. Now, from me and the team here in Lahore, thank you for watching and bye-bye.